The rain fell in cold sheets over Ridgewood, Colorado, a small mountain town where everyone knew their neighbors and trusted their police. But on this gray November morning, something dark had poisoned that trust from within. Officer Rachel Torres stood in the kennel yard behind the police station, her radio crackling with static as she stared at the scene before her. 6 German shepherds lay motionless on the concrete, their bodies twisted in agony, foam dried at their muzzles. The smell of almonds hung faint in the air. Cyanide, she realized with horror. If you're enjoying this story so far, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. Drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from. I love hearing from you. Someone had laced their food with poison. Her hand trembled as she knelt beside Titan, the department's lead narcotics dog. His amber eyes stared blankly at nothing, his tongue lolling from his mouth. She pressed her fingers to his neck, searching for a pulse that would never come. Gone. All of them gone. Behind her, Chief Marcus Webb emerged from the station, his face pale beneath the porch light. He was 58, broad-shouldered, with silver hair and the weathered look of a man who'd spent 30 years holding the line. His badge caught the rain as he approached, each step heavy with dread. "Torres," he said quietly, "tell me, this isn't what I think it is." She stood slowly, rain streaming down her face. "All 6 K9s are dead, sir. Poisoned. Whoever did this knew exactly when and how to strike." Webb's jaw tightened. The kennel area was secured, locked, accessible only to authorized personnel. This wasn't random. This was a message. From inside the station, voices rose in panic. The morning shift had discovered the massacre. Officers gathered at the windows, their faces pressed to the glass, watching in stunned silence as the reality sank in. Ridgewood's entire K9 unit wiped out in a single night. Webb pulled his phone from his pocket, fingers moving across the screen with grim purpose. "Get forensics out here. I want toxicology reports, fingerprints, security footage, everything." He paused, his voice dropping. "And call the DEA. If this is what I think it is, we're going to need reinforcements." Torres nodded, but her mind was already racing. For weeks, they'd been closing in on the Vega cartel, a ruthless drug operation that had turned Ridgewood into a distribution hub. The K9 unit had been instrumental in 3 major busts, seizing over $2 million in product. The dogs had been heroes, unstoppable. Now they were targets. "They knew," Torres whispered. "They knew the dogs were our advantage." Webb didn't answer. He didn't need to. The message was clear. The Vega cartel could reach them anywhere, even inside their own walls. As the rain drummed against the kennel roof, something moved in the shadows beyond the fence. A figure stood watching from the tree line, tall, still, wrapped in a dark jacket. Torres's hand went to her sidearm, but before she could shout, the figure turned and disappeared into the mist. A chill ran down her spine. Whoever had done this was still close, still watching. And somewhere in that same town, in a cabin nestled against the pines, a man named Jack Reeves sat alone in the dark, staring at the photograph in his hand. It showed a younger version of himself in desert fatigues, a Belgian Malinois sitting proudly at his side. The dog's name had been Havoc, and he'd saved Jack's life more times than he could count. Jack was 39 now, his hair streaked with gray, his face carved with lines earned in places most people would never know existed. He'd been a Navy SEAL for 15 years before an IED in Afghanistan had taken his leg below the knee and ended his career. Now he lived quietly in Ridgewood, running a small woodworking shop and trying to forget the sound of gunfire. But tonight, something had pulled him from sleep. A dream maybe, or just instinct. He'd learned long ago to trust that voice in his gut, the one that whispered when danger was near. He set the photograph down and reached for the prosthetic beside his bed. The metal and carbon fiber limb clicked into place with practiced ease. He stood, testing his weight, then moved to the window. Outside, the rain had turned to mist, and through it he could see the glow of police lights in the distance. Something was wrong in Ridgewood. Jack pulled on his jacket and boots, moving with the quiet efficiency of a man who'd spent years preparing for moments like this. He didn't know what had happened yet, but he knew one thing for certain. When good people needed help, he couldn't turn away. As he stepped out into the cold night air, a low whine echoed from the back of his truck. He opened the tailgate, and a massive Belgian Malinois leaped down, shaking off the rain. The dog was 85 pounds of muscle and loyalty, with dark tan fur and intelligent eyes that missed nothing. "Come on, Ghost," Jack murmured, his voice low and steady. "Let's see what's going on." Ghost pressed close to his leg, ears alert, every muscle coiled and ready. The dog had been Jack's companion for 3 years, trained in the same K9 program that had produced havoc. When Jack left the service, Ghost had come with him, a brother in arms, who understood the weight of silence. Together they walked toward the glow of the police station, the mist swirling around them like smoke. Jack didn't know it yet, but his quiet life in Ridgewood was about to end. Because when darkness came for the innocent, men like Jack Reeves didn't hide. They stood up, and they fought back. The Ridgewood police station sat at the edge of town, a low brick building surrounded by chain-link fencing and floodlights that turned the rain into silver needles. By the time Jack Reeves arrived, the parking lot was full of patrol cars, their lights painting the night in red and blue. He parked his truck near the perimeter, Ghost sitting alert in the passenger seat. The dog's ears swiveled toward the commotion, a low growl rumbling deep in his chest. "Easy, boy," Jack said, resting a hand on Ghost's shoulder. "We're just here to listen." Through the fence, he could see officers moving in tight clusters, their voices muted by the rain. Yellow crime scene tape cordoned off the kennel area, and a forensics team in white suits moved carefully through the space, photographing evidence and collecting samples. Jack's stomach tightened. He'd seen enough crime scenes to know what that level of caution meant. Something bad had happened here. A voice broke through his thoughts. "Jack Reeves?" He turned. Officer Rachel Torres stood just outside the fence, her uniform soaked through, her dark hair plastered to her face. She was 32, lean and sharp-eyed, with the kind of focused intensity that came from years on the street. "Rachel," Jack said, nodding. They'd met a few times at the hardware store, exchanged pleasantries. She knew he was ex-military, but had never pressed for details. "You shouldn't be here," she said, but there was no harshness in her tone. Just exhaustion. Saw the lights, wanted to make sure everything was okay. She glanced back at the kennel, then stepped closer, lowering her voice. "Someone poisoned our K9 unit, all 6 dogs, dead by the time we found them this morning." Jack's jaw tightened. He felt Ghost shift beside him, sensing the change in his energy. "Who would do that?" "We think it's connected to the Vega cartel," Torres said. "We've been hitting their distribution lines hard. The dogs were part of every major bust." She paused, her eyes meeting his. This was retaliation. Jack said nothing for a long moment. His mind flashed to havoc, to the day they'd been ambushed in Kandahar, to the way his partner had thrown himself between Jack and a grenade without hesitation. Dogs like that didn't just serve. They sacrificed. "You have any leads?" he asked quietly. Torres shook her head. "Not yet. Security footage was wiped. No forced entry. Whoever did this knew the layout, knew when the kennel would be unguarded." "Inside job?" She hesitated, then nodded. "That's what the chief thinks. But we can't prove it yet." From inside the station, a door slammed. Chief Webb emerged, moving toward them with purposeful strides. He was tall, broad, and carried himself with the weight of command. When he saw Jack, his expression hardened slightly. "Reeves," Webb said, his voice flat. "This is an active crime scene. You need to leave." Jack met his gaze steadily. "Just wanted to know if you needed help." "We don't," Webb said curtly. "This is police business." Torres glanced between them, tension crackling in the air. "Chief, with all due respect, we just lost our entire K9 unit. We're blind out there." "If someone with Jack's background is offering—" "I said no," Webb interrupted. His tone left no room for argument. "We'll handle this through proper channels." Jack held the chief's stare for a moment longer, then nodded once. "Understood." He turned back toward his truck, Ghost falling into step beside him. As they walked away, Torres called after him, "Jack, wait!" He stopped. She jogged over, glancing back to make sure Webb had gone inside. "Look, officially, the chief's right, but off the record?" She lowered her voice. "We're outgunned here. The cartel's been one step ahead of us for months, and now, without the dogs." She trailed off, frustration etched across her face. "What are you asking me, Rachel?" "I'm asking if you'd be willing to help, quietly. No badge, no official capacity, just eyes and ears." Jack studied her face. He'd spent his life answering calls like this, stepping into the fire when others couldn't. But that life was supposed to be behind him. He'd come to Ridgewood to heal, to find peace. He looked down at Ghost, whose amber eyes gazed up at him with unwavering trust. Peace was a luxury the innocent couldn't always afford. "I'll see what I can find," Jack said finally. Torres exhaled in relief. "Thank you. I'll keep you updated on anything." A gunshot cracked through the night. Both of them froze. The sound had come from the east side of town, near the industrial district. Torres's radio erupted with frantic voices. "Shots fired! Shots fired! Officer down at the old Mill Creek warehouse!" She was already running toward her patrol car. Jack moved faster. He whistled once, sharp and low, and Ghost was in the truck before the door fully opened. The engine roared to life, and Jack peeled out of the parking lot, tires kicking up gravel. Torres's voice crackled over the radio frequency he'd tuned into. "All units, respond to Mill Creek. Suspect is armed and dangerous. Do not engage alone." Jack's hands tightened on the wheel. The warehouse district was a maze of abandoned buildings and forgotten streets, perfect territory for an ambush. If an officer was down, every second mattered. Ghost barked once, sharp and alert. "I know, buddy," Jack murmured. "We're going in." The rain hammered harder as they raced through the ray. Empty streets, the town blurring past in streaks of light and shadow. Jack's mind shifted into the mode he'd lived in for 15 years, calm, focused, lethal. He wasn't a cop. He didn't have a badge or jurisdiction, but he had training, experience, and a dog who'd been bred to hunt danger. And tonight, that would have to be enough. The Mill Creek warehouse loomed against the night sky like a rusted skeleton, its metal walls streaked with decay and graffiti. Broken windows gaped like empty eyes, and the surrounding lot was littered with shipping crates and abandoned machinery. Rain pooled in deep puddles that reflected the distant flicker of police lights. Jack pulled his truck to a stop 2 blocks away, killing the engine and headlights. Through the windshield, he could see the faint glow of flashlights moving inside the warehouse. Voices echoed across the wet pavement, sharp, urgent, afraid. Ghost sat rigid in the passenger seat, every muscle coiled, his gaze locked on the building. "Stay close," Jack said, his voice low and steady. "We're going in quiet." He slipped out of the truck, moving with the practiced silence of a man who'd spent years hunting in the dark. Ghost followed, paws soundless on the wet asphalt. Together they skirted the perimeter, staying in the shadows cast by stacked containers and rusted machinery. As they approached the warehouse's side entrance, Jack heard voices, not police radio chatter, but something else, Spanish, low and urgent. He pressed himself against the wall, signaling Ghost to heel. The dog dropped into a crouch beside him, ears flattened, breath controlled. Through a gap in the metal siding, Jack could see movement inside. 3 men, mid-30s, dressed in dark clothing and tactical vests. They carried AR-15 seconds and moved with the confidence of professionals, not local thugs, cartel enforcers. One of them spoke into a radio, his voice harsh. "El perro está muerto. Todos los perros están muertos. Ahora no tienen nada." The dog is dead. All the dogs are dead. Now they have nothing. Jack's jaw tightened. These were the men who'd poisoned the K-9 unit, and now they were here, waiting in ambush. A groan echoed from deeper inside the warehouse. Jack shifted position, catching sight of a figure slumped against a support beam. Officer Brad Callahan, early 40s, his uniform torn and bloodied. He clutched his side, where dark blood seeped between his fingers. The cartel men circled him like wolves, their weapons trained but not firing. They wanted him alive for now. Probably to send another message. Jack's mind raced through options. 3 armed hostiles, 1 wounded officer, unknown number of backup units, minutes away. The smart play was to wait for reinforcements. The safe play. But Callahan didn't have minutes. The blood pooling beneath him said he had seconds. Jack met Ghost's eyes. The dog understood. They'd trained for moments like this: silent entry, overwhelming force, surgical precision. He pulled a small tactical knife from his belt, checking the edge. Then he gave Ghost the signal. A single tap on his thigh, followed by a pointed finger toward the nearest hostile. Ghost's muscles bunched. Ready. Jack moved. He slipped through the gap in the siding, boots silent on the concrete floor. The first hostile stood 20 feet away, his back turned, focused on Callahan. Jack closed the distance in seconds, striking from behind. His arm wrapped around the man's throat, cutting off the shout before it could form. The knife flashed once, precise and lethal, and the man crumpled silently. The second hostile turned, eyes widening. "K?" Ghost launched. 85 pounds of trained fury hit the man chest high, jaws clamping onto his weapon arm. The AR-15 clattered to the ground as the man screamed, twisting desperately. Ghost held firm, dragging him down. The third hostile spun toward Jack, raising his weapon. "Intruso!" Jack was already moving. He dove behind a stack of crates as gunfire erupted, bullets punching through metal and wood. The sound echoed like thunder in the enclosed space. Ghost released his target and bolted for cover, trained to retreat under fire. The wounded hostile clutched his mangled arm, cursing in pain. Jack pulled his sidearm, a Glock 19 he'd carried since his SEAL days, and blind-fired twice around the corner. Not to hit, but to suppress. To buy time. The shooting stopped. Silence filled the warehouse, broken only by Callahan's ragged breathing and the drip of rain through the broken roof. "You're outnumbered, amigo," the third hostile called out in accented English. "Drop the gun and walk away. This doesn't concern you." Jack didn't answer. He was already moving, circling through the shadows toward a better angle. Ghost mirrored him on the opposite side, silent as smoke. The hostile fired again, spraying bullets in a wide arc. Panic shooting. He'd lost track of Jack's position. That was the mistake. Jack emerged from behind a support column, his weapon raised. 2 shots, center mass. The hostile dropped, his rifle clattering beside him. The wounded man, the one Ghost had taken down, tried to crawl toward his weapon. Ghost was on him in an instant, jaws closing around his wrist. The man screamed, abandoning the gun. Jack moved to Callahan, kneeling beside him. The officer's face was pale, his breathing shallow. The bullet had caught him in the side, just below the vest. Bad, but survivable if they moved fast. "Hang on," Jack said, pressing his hand over the wound. "Help's coming." Callahan's eyes focused on him, confused. "Who are you?" "Friend of Rachel Torres. Can you walk?" "I don't know," Ghost barked once a warning. Jack's head snapped up. From the darkness at the far end of the warehouse, more voices echoed. More footsteps, reinforcements. The cartel had sent a second team. Jack hauled Callahan to his feet, the officer groaning in pain. "We need to move, now." Ghost took point, leading them toward the side entrance. Behind them, shouts erupted in Spanish, followed by the crack of gunfire. Bullets sparked off metal, ricocheting wildly. Jack half-dragged, half-carried Callahan through the gap in the siding, Ghost covering their retreat with fierce barking that echoed like a war cry. They stumbled into the rain, the cold air hitting them like a slap. Ahead, red and blue lights flooded the lot. Patrol cars screeched to a halt, officers pouring out with weapons drawn. "Officer down!" Jack shouted. "Wounded officer!" Torres was the first to reach them. Her eyes widened when she saw Callahan, then narrowed when she saw Jack. "What the hell happened?" "Ambush," Jack said, lowering Callahan to the ground as paramedics rushed over. 3 hostiles inside, at least 3 more on the way. They're armed with rifles and body armor. This wasn't random. They were waiting for your people. Chief Webb arrived, his face dark with fury. "Reeves, I told you to stay out of this. If I had, Callahan would be dead." Webb opened his mouth to argue, then closed it. He looked at Callahan, at the blood, at the fear in his officer's eyes. The anger didn't leave his face, but something else flickered there too. Grudging respect. "Get him to the hospital," Webb ordered the paramedics. Then he turned to Torres. "Secure the perimeter. I want every exit covered. If there are more cartel inside, we end this tonight." As officers moved into position, Torres pulled Jack aside. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for saving him." Jack nodded. "This is bigger than I thought, Rachel. They didn't just poison your dogs to send a message. They're clearing the board, taking out your best assets so they can move freely. Then, we need to hit them harder," she said, her jaw set with determination. "You need more than that," Jack said, glancing down at Ghost, who sat calmly at his side despite the chaos. "You need a new K9 unit, and I know where to start." Torres followed his gaze. To the Belgian Malinois, whose amber eyes glowed with fierce intelligence. "Ghost," Jack said softly. "He's trained for exactly this kind of work. Narcotics detection, tactical assault, search and rescue. He was part of the same program that trained your dogs." Torres stared at Ghost, then at Jack. "You're offering to help us, officially." "No," Jack said. "I'm offering to finish what they started." Behind them, the warehouse erupted in gunfire as the tactical team engaged the remaining cartel fighters. The rain fell harder, washing blood into the gutters. And somewhere in the darkness, the Vega cartel was watching, waiting, planning their next move. But so was Jack Reeves. And when a Navy SEAL decided to fight, he didn't stop until the mission was complete. The safe house sat at the end of a gravel road, hidden beneath a canopy of pines that turned the morning light into a dim green glow. It was a modest cabin, weathered wood and stone, with a single porch light that flickered against the mist. To anyone passing by, it looked abandoned. But inside, the Vega cartel's regional commander sat at a battered wooden table, his fingers drumming a slow rhythm as he listened to the voice crackling over the encrypted radio. Carlos Vega was 42, lean and coiled like a spring. His black hair was slicked back, his jaw shadowed with stubble, and his eyes carried the cold calculation of a man who'd survived by eliminating threats before they could breathe. He wore a simple black shirt and jeans, but the .45 holstered at his hip and the satellite phone on the table spoke to his authority. "All 6 dogs are confirmed dead," the voice on the radio said. "Marco, one of his lieutenants." "The cops are scrambling. They've got nothing." Carlos smiled faintly. "Good. What about the officer?" A pause. "He survived." The smile vanished. "Explain." Someone intervened. "Civilian. Ex-military, we think. He had a dog with him, trained K9. Took out 3 of our men before we could regroup." Carlos's fingers stopped drumming. He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper that carried more menace than any shout. "1 man and 1 dog stopped 3 of my soldiers? He knew what he was doing, Jefe. Moved like special forces. And the dog." Marco hesitated. "The dog was fast. Precise. Not some pet." Carlos exhaled slowly, his mind already working through the implications. The Ridgewood police were weak, disorganized, easy to manipulate. But an operator, a trained warrior with combat experience that changed the equation. "Find out who he is," Carlos said quietly. "Name, background, connections, everything. Already on it. We'll have the intel by tonight." "Good. And Marco?" "See, Jefe? The next time you engage him, don't send 3 men, send 10, and make sure he doesn't walk away." Carlos ended the call and stood, moving to the window. Through the trees, he could see the faint glow of Ridgewood in the distance, a town he'd slowly carved into his territory over the past 2 years. The police had been a nuisance at first, but he'd learned how to neutralize them: bribes, threats, and, when necessary, violence. The K9 unit had been their last real weapon. Now it was gone. But this new player, this ghost in the night, was something different. Carlos pulled his phone from his pocket and dialed, The line clicked open after 2 rings. "It's me?" Carlos said. "We have a problem." The voice on the other end was older, rougher, with the weight of decades in the cartel. "What kind of problem?" "Someone's helping the police. Ex-military. Skilled. He took out 3 of ours last night and saved a cop." A long silence. Then, "Is he official? DEA? FBI?" "No. Freelance. Local." "Then, handle him. Quietly. We're too close to the final shipment to have complications." Carlos's grip tightened on the phone. The final shipment, 500 kilos of pure cocaine, worth $30 million on the street. It was set to move through Ridgewood in 72 hours, the culmination of months of planning. If the police got wind of it, everything collapsed. "I'll take care of it," Carlos said. "See that you do." "And Carlos?" The voice hardened. "If this man becomes a threat, don't just kill him. Make an example. Show the town what happens when they fight back." The line went dead. Carlos pocketed the phone and returned to the table, where a map of Ridgewood lay spread across the surface. Red circles marked key locations: the police station, the warehouse district, the highway routes in and out of town. Blue X's marked safe houses and drop points. And now, scrawled in black ink at the edge of the map, was a single question mark. Who is the man with the dog? Across town, in the quiet of his workshop, Jack Reeves stood at his workbench, running his hands over a piece of oak he'd been shaping into a chair leg. The rhythmic scrape of the plane usually calmed him, gave him something to focus on besides the memories. But today, the motion felt hollow. His mind kept circling back to the warehouse. To Callahan's blood pooling on the concrete, to the cold efficiency of the cartel men who'd been ready to execute a cop without hesitation. Ghost lay near the wood stove, his head resting on his paws, but his eyes were open, tracking Jack's every movement. The dog knew. He always knew when Jack's mind was in the fight. Jack set the plane down and leaned against the bench, exhaling slowly. He'd told himself he was done with war, that he'd left that life behind in the sand and blood of Afghanistan. But war had a way of finding you, even when you ran. A knock at the door pulled him from his thoughts. He moved to the window, peering through the curtain. Rachel Torres stood on the porch, her patrol car parked in the driveway. She wasn't in uniform jeans, a leather jacket, her hair down. Off duty. Jack opened the door. "Rachel." "Can I come in?" He stepped aside, and she entered, glancing around the workshop. Sawdust hung in the air, and the smell of fresh-cut wood filled the space. It was simple, honest work. The kind that reminded you the world could still be built, not just destroyed. "Nice place," she said. "Thanks. Coffee?" "Sure." He poured 2 cups from the pot on the counter, handing her one. They stood in silence for a moment, the only sound the crackle of the fire and Ghost's faint breathing. "How's Callahan?" Jack asked. "Stable. Doctors say he'll make a full recovery, thanks to you." She paused, meeting his eyes. "Chief Webb is pissed, but he knows you saved Brad's life. Off the record, he's grateful." Jack nodded. "Good. But that's not why I'm here." Torres set her cup down, her expression hardening. "We ran the scene at the warehouse. 3 bodies, all cartel, clean kills, professional." She studied him. "You were a SEAL, weren't you?" Jack said nothing. "I looked you up," she continued, "after you left last night. Jack Reeves, 15 years with SEAL Team 6, multiple deployments, Purple Heart, Bronze Star. Medically retired after an IED took your leg." He glanced down at the prosthetic, then back at her. "Life's over." "Is it?" She stepped closer. "Because from where I'm standing, you just walked back into it." Jack's jaw tightened. "I helped because a cop was dying. That doesn't mean I'm signing up for a war. This is a war, Jack. The Vega cartel isn't some street gang. They're organized, funded, and ruthless. They poisoned 6 dogs to send a message. They ambushed one of my officers. And they're not stopping." Her voice cracked slightly. "We're outgunned, outmatched. And without the K-9 unit, we're blind." Jack looked at Ghost, who had lifted his head at the sound of Rachel's distress. If this story has you on the edge of your seat, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss stories like this. Your support means everything and helps me bring you more incredible true stories of courage and loyalty. "What are you asking me?" he said quietly. "I'm asking you to help us finish this. You and Ghost. We need someone who can operate outside the normal rules, someone who knows how to fight dirty." She paused. "Someone who won't stop until the job's done." Jack was silent for a long time, he thought. Of Havoc, of the men he'd served with, of the promise he'd made when he left the military. No more killing, no more war. But that promise felt like ash in his mouth now. Because men like Carlos Vega didn't understand peace. They only understood power, and the only way to stop them was to speak their language. "I'll help," Jack said finally. "But I do this my way. No badges, no red tape. I find them, I stop them, and I don't ask permission." Torres nodded slowly. "Understood. And when this is over, I walk away." "Deal." Jack extended his hand, and she shook it. Outside, the mist began to lift, revealing the mountains in the distance. Somewhere in those hills, the cartel was regrouping, planning their next move. But now, they had something they hadn't expected. A predator in the dark. And he was hunting them. The Ridgewood Medical Center hummed with the quiet efficiency of a small-town hospital. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, and the scent of antiseptic hung in the air. Officer Brad Callahan lay in a recovery room, his side wrapped in thick bandages, an IV drip feeding steady fluids into his arm. He stared at the ceiling, replaying the ambush in his mind. The darkness of the warehouse. The cold metal of the gun barrel pressed to his temple. The certainty that he was about to die. Then the shadow had come. Fast, silent, lethal. A knock pulled him from his thoughts. The door opened, and Jack Reeves stepped inside, Ghost at his side. "Mind if we visit?" Jack asked. Callahan blinked, recognition dawning slowly. "You're the guy, the one who pulled me out." Jack nodded. "How are you feeling?" "Like I got shot." Callahan managed a weak smile. "But alive, thanks to you." Jack pulled a chair close to the bed and sat. Ghost settled beside him, resting his head on his paws. The dog's presence seemed to calm the room, easing the tension in Callahan's shoulders. "What the hell happened out there?" Callahan asked. "1 second, I'm responding to a disturbance call. Next. Thing I know, I'm surrounded by cartel guns." "It was a setup," Jack said quietly. "They knew you were coming. Someone tipped them off." Callahan's face darkened. "You're saying there's a leak in the department?" "I'm saying someone knew your route, your timing, and your backup situation. That's not luck." "That's intel," Callahan cursed under his breath. "Who?" "That's what we need to find out." Jack leaned forward. "Tell me everything you remember about the call. Who dispatched it? What was the location? Any unusual details?" Callahan closed his eyes, thinking. Dispatch said there was suspicious activity at the Mill Creek warehouse. No specifics, just a civilian tip. I was closest, so I responded. "Who took the tip?" "Desk Sergeant Kevin Marsh." Jack filed the name away. "Anyone else know you were heading there?" "Standard protocol, I radioed my position to dispatch before I entered." "But," Callahan hesitated, "there was a delay. Maybe 30 seconds between when I called it in and when dispatch acknowledged. Long enough to relay your position to someone else." Callahan's eyes hardened. "You think Marsh is dirty?" "I think someone in your chain is feeding the cartel information, and until we know who, you're all vulnerable." A heavy silence settled over the room. Ghost lifted his head, ears twitching toward the door. A second later, footsteps echoed in the hallway. Rachel Torres appeared in the doorway, her face tight with tension. "Jack, we need to talk. Now." They stepped into the hallway, leaving Callahan to rest. Torres pulled Jack into an empty waiting room and closed the door. "We got preliminary forensics back from the kennel," she said, her voice low. "The poison was military-grade cyanide, mixed into the dog's food. But here's the thing, it wasn't just dumped in. It was carefully measured, precise doses designed to kill without leaving obvious traces. Someone with training, Jack said. Exactly. And the security footage? It wasn't just wiped. It was professionally scrubbed. Zero recovery. Whoever did this knew exactly what they were doing. Jack's mind raced. You're looking at someone with technical skills, access to military-grade toxins, and inside knowledge of your facility, which narrows it down to maybe 3 people in the department. Torres handed him a folder. I made a list. Unofficially. Jack opened it. 3 names, each with a brief dossier. Kevin Marsh, desk sergeant, 15 years on the force. Divorced, financial troubles, recently denied for promotion. Alan Cross, IT specialist, 8 years. Former Army Signal Corps, access to all systems, lives alone, minimal social ties. Denise Porter, records clerk, 12 years. Widowed, daughter in college, recently approved for a large personal loan. Any of them could have motive, Jack said, studying the faces. Financial pressure, resentment, opportunity. We can't confront them without proof, Torres said. If we tip our hand and we're wrong, the real leak disappears. Then we don't confront them. We watch them. Torres raised an eyebrow. You want to run surveillance on our own people? You want to stop the next ambush? She considered this, then nodded slowly. What do you need? Access to your personnel files, work schedules, and communication logs. And I need it quietly. I can get you into the system tonight. After hours. Jack glanced at his watch. I'll meet you at midnight, back entrance. As Torres left, Ghost stood and moved to Jack's side, pressing against his leg. The dog's presence was steady, grounding. Jack knelt, running his hand over Ghost's neck. We're stepping into deep water, buddy. You ready for this? Ghost's amber eyes met his, unflinching. They'd walked through fire together before. They'd do it again. That night, the Ridgewood police station stood dark and quiet. Most of the building locked down except for the dispatch center and holding cells. Jack approached from the rear parking lot, moving through the shadows cast by the floodlights. Torres met him at the back door, her face illuminated by the glow of her phone. We've got maybe 2 hours before the overnight shift makes rounds. Make it count. She led him through the empty corridors to the IT office, a small room crammed with servers, monitors, and tangled cables. The screens glowed softly in the darkness, casting everything in shades of blue and green. Cross keeps everything locked down, Torres said, logging into a terminal. But I've got admin access through records. She pulled up the personnel files, and Jack scanned through them methodically. Financial records, work logs, phone records, looking for patterns, inconsistencies, anything that didn't fit. Kevin Marsh had made several late-night calls to an unlisted number over the past 2 months. Always brief, always after midnight. Alan Cross had accessed the kennel security system multiple times in the week leading up to the poisoning. Each time, he'd logged in remotely from an external IP address. Denise Porter's recent loan? It was for $50,000, far more than her salary could justify, and the lender was a shell company based in Mexico. Jack leaned back, exhaling slowly. They're all dirty. Torres stared at the screen. All 3? Look at the timeline. Marsh makes the calls. Cross wipes the footage. Porter provides the financial trail. They're not working alone, they're working together. Jesus. Torres's hand shook slightly as she pulled up more files. If they're all compromised, then the entire department is at risk. Not just at risk, infiltrated. Jack pulled out his phone and photographed the screens. We need to isolate them before they realize we're onto them. A sound echoed in the hallway footsteps, slow and deliberate. Torres froze. Someone's here. Jack moved to the door, peering through the small window. A figure moved past, silhouetted against the emergency lights, broad-shouldered. Familiar. Chief Webb. He was. Alone, walking toward his office, with a folder tucked under his arm. Torres whispered, "What's he doing here at this hour?" Good question. They waited until Webb disappeared into his office, then slipped out of IT and moved quietly down the hall. Jack motioned for Torres to stay back as he approached Webb's door. Through the frosted glass he could see the chief sitting at his desk, phone pressed to his ear. His voice was muffled, but the tension in his posture was clear. Jack pulled a small listening device from his pocket, a relic from his SEAL days, and carefully affixed it to the door frame. The signal transmitted directly to his phone. Webb's voice crackled through the speaker, clear and sharp. "I don't care what Carlos wants. We had a deal. My people stay safe, and I look the other way on the shipments. But poisoning the dogs? Ambushing my officer? That wasn't part of the arrangement." Jack's blood ran cold. Webb, the chief of police. The man responsible for protecting the town. He was working with the cartel. Webb's voice continued, bitter and resigned. "You tell Carlos if he touches another one of my people, the deal's off. I'll burn this whole operation down myself." The line went silent. Webb ended the call and sat in the darkness, his head in his hands. Jack pulled away from the door, his mind racing. Torres stood behind him, her face pale. "Did you hear that?" she whispered. Jack nodded. "We need to get out of here. Now." They moved quickly through the empty building, Ghost padding silently beside them. Outside, the night air was cold and sharp, biting at their skin. Torres leaned against her car, her breath coming in short gasps. "The chief. Our chief is working with them." "Not by choice," Jack said quietly. "He's compromised. They've got leverage on him." "That doesn't excuse it." "No. But it explains why the cartel's been ahead of you at every turn." Torres looked at him, her eyes blazing with fury and betrayal. "What do we do?" Jack pulled out his phone, reviewing the photos and recordings he'd gathered. "We build a case, airtight, undeniable, and then we take all of them down at once." "How?" Jack's gaze hardened. "By doing what I do best, hunting." The mountains surrounding Ridgewood turned silver under the rising moon, their peaks sharp against the night sky. Somewhere in those hills the cartel was preparing for their final shipment, but now they had a hunter on their trail. And when Jack Reeves hunted, he didn't miss. The next 48 hours passed in a blur of surveillance, planning, and preparation. Jack operated from the shadows, moving through Ridgewood like a ghost, watching, listening, gathering the threads that would unravel the cartel's operation. He tracked Kevin Marsh to a dive bar on the outskirts of town, where the desk sergeant met with a man Jack recognized from the warehouse ambush, Marco, one of Carlos Vega's lieutenants. They sat in a back booth, speaking in hushed tones while cash changed hands under the table. Jack photographed everything from across the street, his camera lens trained through the bar's grimy window. Ghost sat beside him in the truck, perfectly still, his eyes tracking every movement. "Good boy," Jack murmured. "We're building the case piece by piece." Next was Alan Cross. The IT specialist left the station late one evening and drove to a storage facility on the edge of town. Jack followed at a distance, headlights off, navigating by moonlight and instinct. Cross unlocked Unit 47 and disappeared inside. Through the crack in the door, Jack caught glimpses of computer equipment, burner phones, and stacks of hard drives. This was where Cross had been coordinating the surveillance wipe and communication intercepts. Jack marked the location on his mental map. Another piece of the puzzle, Denise Porter was the most careful. She never met directly with cartel members, never made suspicious phone calls, but she did visit a small accounting office in a neighboring town every Tuesday afternoon. Jack waited outside, watching through binoculars as she handed a manila envelope to a man in an expensive suit. The man, later identified through a quick background check as a money launderer with ties to Mexican cartels, smiled and nodded. The financial trail was complete. By the third day, Jack had everything he needed. Photographs, recordings, license plates, transaction records, the entire conspiracy laid bare. But evidence alone wouldn't stop the cartel. It would only expose them. To truly end this, Jack needed to strike at the source, Carlos Vega. That evening, Jack met Rachel Torres at a secluded overlook outside town. The sun was setting, painting the valley in shades of orange and red. Below them, Ridgewood looked peaceful, unaware of the storm gathering on its borders. "I have what we need," Jack said, handing her a USB drive. "Everything's on there, names, dates, locations, enough to bring charges against Marsh, Cross, Porter, and Webb." Torres took the drive, her expression conflicted. Webb too? He made his choice. Even if he was coerced, he let it happen. She nodded slowly, pocketing the drive. "What about the cartel? Taking down our dirty cops won't stop them." "No. But it'll blind them. Without inside intel, they'll be vulnerable." Jack pulled out a folded map, spreading it across the hood of his truck. "The final shipment is moving through Ridgewood in 72 hours. 500 kilos of cocaine worth $30 million. If we intercept it, we cripple their entire operation." "How do you know this?" "I've been listening." Jack tapped his phone, where hours of intercepted communications were stored. Carlos Vega coordinates everything through encrypted radio. But encryption only works if you're careful. He's gotten sloppy. Torres studied the map, her finger tracing the marked routes. They're using Highway 9, through the canyon pass. Isolated, minimal traffic, easy to control. Exactly. Which makes it perfect for an ambush. She looked up sharply. "You want to hit them on the road?" "I want to end this. One strike, surgical and final. We take out the shipment, arrest Carlos and his lieutenants, and shut down the entire network. That's insane. We'd need a tactical team, federal backup." "We'd need the element of surprise," Jack interrupted. "The moment you involve federal agencies, word gets out. And the cartel disappears." "So what? You're planning to do this alone?" Jack's gaze was steady. "Not alone. I have Ghost." Torres stared at him, torn between disbelief and admiration. "You're serious?" "I've done this before, Rachel. Different country, different enemy. Same principles." She was silent for a long moment, weighing the risks. Finally, she exhaled. "If I help you, I'm throwing away my career. Maybe my freedom. Then don't help. Give the USB to the feds, let them handle it. You've done your job." She shook her head. "No, they poisoned our dogs. Ambushed our people. They turned our chief into a puppet." Her voice hardened. "This is personal now." Jack nodded. "Then we do it together." They spent the next 2 hours planning. Routes, timing, equipment. Jack sketched out the ambush point, a narrow section of the canyon where the road curved sharply, flanked by steep rock faces. Perfect for a bottleneck. "We'll need spike strips to disable the vehicles," Jack said, "flashbangs to disorient. And firearms enough to make them think twice about fighting back." "I can get the equipment," Torres said, "but we'll be outnumbered. Carlos will have at least a dozen men protecting that shipment. Then we don't fight them head-on. We use Ghost to flush them out, create chaos, and strike while they're disorganized." Torres glanced at the Belgian Malinois, who sat calmly beside Jack's truck, his ears perked and alert. "You trust him that much?" "With my life." As night fell, they finalized the plan. The ambush would happen in 2 days, just before dawn, when the shipment was scheduled to pass through. But as Jack drove back to his cabin, a nagging doubt tugged at his mind. This wasn't just about stopping a drug shipment. This was about revenge for the murdered K-9S, for Officer Callahan, for every life the cartel had destroyed. And revenge, Jack knew, had a way of consuming you. The night before the ambush, Jack sat alone in his workshop, cleaning his weapons with the methodical care of a man who'd done it 1,000 times. His Glock 19, his AR-15, his combat knife, each one stripped, inspected, and reassembled. Ghost lay nearby, watching him with those amber eyes that seemed to understand everything. "We're going back into the fire tomorrow," Jack said quietly. "You know that, right?" Ghost's tail thumped once against the floor. "I promised myself I was done with this life, that I'd find peace." Jack set the gun down, his hands trembling slightly. "But I can't walk away. Not when people need help." Ghost stood and moved to Jack's side, resting his head on Jack's knee. The weight of that simple gesture, trust, loyalty, companionship, steadied him. "All right, boy," Jack whispered. "One more mission, then we're done." Outside, the wind howled through the pines, carrying with it the promise of violence and redemption. Dawn was only hours away, and the hunt was about to begin. The canyon stretched before them like a scar carved into the earth, its walls rising steep and jagged on either side of the narrow highway. The first light of dawn painted the rocks in shades of amber and rust, but the road itself remained shadowed, cold, and silent. Jack Reeves crouched behind a boulder at the canyon's edge, his AR-15 resting across his knees. He wore dark tactical gear, no insignia, no identification, and his face was streaked with camouflage paint. Beside him, Ghost lay perfectly still, ears pricked toward the road below, every muscle coiled and ready. 50 yards downhill, Rachel Torres positioned the spike strip across both lanes, securing it with rocks and debris to keep it flat until the moment of activation. She moved quickly, efficiently, her hands steady, despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. Jack spoke into the small radio clipped to his vest. "Torres, you're exposed. Get to cover." Her voice crackled back. "Almost done. 30 seconds." He scanned the canyon through his scope, checking sight lines and escape routes. This was the perfect kill box, one way in, one way out, with nowhere for the cartel to maneuver. But that also meant if something went wrong, they'd be trapped too. Torres finished securing the spike strip and scrambled up the slope, sliding into position behind a cluster of boulders 20 yards from Jack. She carried a shotgun and a sidearm, both loaded and ready. "In position," she said, breathing hard. Jack checked his watch. 5:47 a.m. The shipment was due in 13 minutes. "Remember the plan," he said quietly. "I disable the lead vehicle with the spike strip. Ghost creates chaos. We use the confusion to isolate Carlos and secure the drugs. No unnecessary casualties. And if they don't surrender? Then we improvise." The radio crackled with static, then fell silent. The canyon held its breath. At 5:58 a.m., the sound of engines echoed through the pass. Low, rumbling, growing louder. "Here they come," Torres whispered. Jack raised his rifle, sighting down the scope. A moment later, 3 black SUVs rounded the curve, moving in tight formation, reinforced frames, tinted windows, cartel insignia painted over with primer. The lead vehicle hit the spike strip. The tires exploded with sharp cracks, and the SUV swerved violently, its driver fighting for control. Sparks flew as the rims ground against asphalt, and the vehicle slewed sideways, blocking the road. The second and third SUVs screeched to a halt, their doors flying open. Armed men poured out 12, maybe 15, all carrying assault rifles and submachine guns. "Now!" Jack shouted. He fired 3 controlled bursts, striking the ground near the cartel men's feet. Not to kill, but to drive them into cover. Panic erupted. The men scattered, shouting in Spanish, firing wildly toward the canyon walls. Jack whistled once sharp and low. Ghost launched from his position like a missile, bounding down the slope with terrifying speed. He hit the first man chest high, jaws clamping onto the weapon arm. The rifle clattered away as the man screamed, falling hard. The cartel soldiers turned toward the dog, confused and disoriented. Ghost was already moving, darting between them, a blur of tan fur and white teeth. He struck another man, then another, each attack precise and devastating. "Es un perro. Mátenlo." Gunfire erupted, but Ghost was too fast. He weaved through the chaos, using the vehicles as cover, his training turning him into an instrument of controlled violence. Jack provided covering fire, keeping the cartel pinned down. Beside him, Torres fired her shotgun, the blasts echoing like thunder. Amid the chaos, one of the rear SUV doors opened, and Carlos Vega stepped out. He was calm, composed, 45 inches his hand. His eyes swept the canyon, reading the ambush with cold precision. "Retirada," he shouted. "Fall back to the second vehicle." The cartel men began to regroup, pulling back toward Carlos's position. Jack cursed under his breath. If they formed a defensive line, this turned into a siege. He couldn't let that happen. Jack slung his rifle and pulled a flashbang from his vest. He armed it, counted to 3, and hurled it toward the clustered vehicles. The explosion was blinding, a white-hot burst of light and sound that shattered the morning stillness. The cartel men stumbled, disoriented, clutching their ears. Ghost surged forward, taking down 2 more men before they could recover. Jack was already moving, sliding down the slope with his sidearm drawn. He hit the road hard, rolling to absorb the impact, and came up firing. Carlos saw him coming. Their eyes met across the chaos, predator and predator. Carlos raised his .45. Jack fired first. The bullet struck Carlos's shoulder, spinning him around. He dropped to one knee, cursing but didn't fall. With his good hand, he raised the gun again. Ghost hit him from the side, a 90-pound missile of fur and fury. Carlos went down hard, the .45 skittering across the pavement. Ghost pinned him, jaws inches from his throat, growling low and menacing. "No, no," Carlos shouted, freezing. Jack reached them, his gun trained on Carlos's head. "Don't move." The remaining cartel men, seeing their leader captured, began to lower their weapons. Torres emerged from cover, her shotgun raised, and herded them into a tight group near the disabled SUVs. "On the ground, hands behind your heads." One by one, they complied, the fight bleeding out of them. Jack kept his gun on Carlos, who glared up at him with cold hatred. "You just signed your death warrant, gringo." "Maybe," Jack said. "But you're going to prison either way." Ghost growled again, and Carlos flinched. Torres moved through the scene, zip-tying wrists and checking for hidden weapons. "We need to call this in. Get back up before." A engine roared in the distance. Jack's head snapped up. Another vehicle was coming, a 4th SUV, delayed but closing fast. "Torres, we've got company." She spun toward the sound, raising her shotgun. The SUV came around the curve too fast, tires screaming. It didn't slow. "Get down," Jack shouted. The SUV smashed through the wreckage, plowing into the disabled vehicles with a deafening crash. The driver's door flew open, and Marco stepped out, an AR-15 inches his hands. "Carlos, aguanta!" Marco opened fire, spraying bullets across the canyon. Jack dove behind the lead SUV, pulling Ghost with him. Torres scrambled for cover as rounds punched through metal and shattered glass. Marco advanced, firing in controlled bursts, moving like a soldier. This wasn't panic. This was a rescue operation. Jack leaned out and returned fire, but Marco was already repositioning, using the wrecked vehicles as cover. The remaining cartel men, seeing reinforcements, began to stir, reaching for discarded weapons. "Torres, keep them pinned." She fired twice, the shotgun blasts driving the cartel men back down. Marco threw a smoke grenade, and thick gray clouds billowed across the road. He disappeared into the haze, moving toward Carlos. Jack couldn't see him, couldn't track him, but Ghost could. The dog's ears swiveled, locking onto the faint sound of footsteps in the smoke. Jack tapped his shoulder twice, the signal for hunt. Ghost vanished into the smoke like a shadow. For a moment, everything was chaos, smoke, gunfire, shouting. Then came the sound Jack had been waiting for. A scream, sharp and sudden. Marco staggered out of the smoke, Ghost's jaws clamped around his weapon arm. The AR-15 clattered to the ground. Marco swung wildly with his free hand, but Ghost held firm, dragging him down. Jack emerged from cover, his rifle trained. "It's over, Marco." Marco spat blood, his eyes blazing with defiance. "You think this stops anything? There's 100 more like me." "Maybe," Jack said. "But today, you lose." He zip-tied Marco's wrists and hauled him to his feet, shoving him toward the others. Torres moved through the smoke, securing the last of the cartel men. The canyon fell silent except for the crackle of flames from one of the damaged SUVs. Jack knelt beside Carlos, who still lay pinned beneath Ghost's watchful gaze. "Your shipment's gone," Jack said quietly. "Your men are in custody. And your operation in Ridgewood is finished." Carlos laughed bitterly. "You're one man. You can't stop what's coming. Watch me." The sound of sirens echoed through the canyon. Backup was arriving, state police, DEA, federal agents. Torres had made the call the moment the shooting stopped. Jack stood, signaling Ghost to release. The dog backed away, his job done. As the first patrol cars rounded the curve, lights flashing, Torres walked over to Jack. Her face was streaked with sweat and gunpowder, but her eyes were clear. "We did it," she said. Jack nodded, exhaustion settling into his bones. "Yeah, we did." Ghost sat beside him, tail wagging slowly, his amber eyes watching the sunrise break over the canyon walls. It was over. The hunt was done. The Ridgewood police station had never seen a day like this. By noon, federal agents swarmed the building, their dark suits and stern faces a stark contrast to the small-town deputies who watched in stunned silence. The DEA had taken control of the investigation, and the press had descended like locusts, their cameras trained on every door and window. Inside the holding cells, Kevin Marsh, Alan Cross, and Denise Porter sat in separate rooms, their heads bowed, their careers and freedom gone. In a fourth cell, Chief Harold Webb stared at the wall, his badge confiscated, his legacy shattered. And in the largest holding area, Carlos Vega and his men waited for federal transport, their silence cold and resigned. Jack Reeves stood in the parking lot, leaning against his truck, Ghost at his side. He'd given his statement to the DEA 3 times, each repetition more exhausting than the last. His hands ached, his leg throbbed where the prosthetic met flesh, and every muscle in his body screamed for rest. Rachel Torres emerged from the building, her face drawn but determined. She walked over, stopping a few feet away. "The feds want to offer you a commendation," she said, "maybe even a consultant position." Jack shook his head. "I'm not interested." "I figured." She smiled faintly. "But you should know what you did here saved this town. Maybe more." "It wasn't just me." Torres glanced down at Ghost, who sat calmly beside Jack, his eyes bright despite the long night. "No, it wasn't." They stood in silence for a moment, the weight of everything that had happened settling between. "What happens now?" Jack asked. "The department gets rebuilt. New leadership, new protocols. It'll take time, but we'll recover." She paused. "And you?" Jack looked at the mountains in the distance, their peaks still dusted with snow. "I go back to my cabin, back to woodworking, back to the quiet. You deserve it." He nodded, but something in his chest felt unfinished. Hollow. Torres seemed to sense it. "Jack, you know you can't save everyone, right?" "I know. And you know you don't have to do this alone." He met her eyes, and for a moment the walls he'd built around himself cracked just slightly. "Maybe." She handed him a card, her personal number, written in neat handwriting. "If you ever need anything, or if you just want to talk." Jack pocketed the card. "Thanks, Rachel." As she walked back toward the station, Jack climbed into his truck. Ghost hopped into the passenger seat, and together they drove away from the chaos, leaving the sirens and cameras behind. The cabin felt different when Jack returned. It was still the same weathered wood and stone, the same quiet workshop filled with sawdust and half-finished projects. But something had shifted. He wasn't running anymore. He was home. Over the next few weeks, life in Ridgewood began to return to normal. The cartel's network was dismantled, their assets seized, and their leaders prosecuted. The poisoned K-9 unit was honored with a memorial in the town square, a bronze statue of a German shepherd, his head held high, watching over the streets he'd once protected. Jack attended the ceremony, standing at the back of the crowd. He didn't speak, didn't draw attention to himself. He just watched as the families of the fallen officers laid flowers at the base of the statue, their grief raw but tempered by pride. Beside him, Ghost sat quietly, his gaze fixed on the bronze figure as if understanding what it represented. "They were heroes," Jack murmured, "just like you." Ghost's tail wagged once, slow and solemn. As the ceremony ended and the crowd dispersed, a young boy approached. He was maybe 8 years old, with freckles and wide, curious eyes. "Is that your dog?" the boy asked, pointing at Ghost. Jack nodded. "Yeah, his name's Ghost. He's cool." The boy hesitated, then added, "My dad was a cop. He died last year." Jack's chest tightened. "I'm sorry." "It's okay. Mom says he's watching over us." The boy knelt down, and Ghost leaned forward, letting the child stroke his fur. "I want to be like him when I grow up. Brave and strong." Jack crouched beside them, his voice soft. "You know what real bravery is?" The boy shook his head. "It's being scared and doing the right thing anyway. Your dad was brave because he chose to protect people, even when it was hard. And you can be brave too, just by being kind, standing up for what's right, and never giving up." The boy smiled, his eyes brightening. "Like you and Ghost?" Jack smiled back. "Yeah, like us." As the boy ran back to his mother, Jack stood, watching them disappear into the crowd. For the first time in years, he felt something he hadn't allowed himself to feel. Hope. That evening, Jack sat on his porch, a cup of coffee in hand, watching the sun set over the mountains. Ghost lay beside him, his head resting on Jack's boot, the two of them wrapped in the quiet peace of the fading day. The nightmares that had haunted Jack for so long were still there, lurking in the shadows of his mind. But they felt distant now, manageable. He'd fought one last battle, and he'd won. Not because he'd defeated the enemy, but because he'd remembered who he was. A protector, a warrior, a man who stood for something greater than himself. The phone in his pocket buzzed. A text from Rachel Torres, memorial dedication, went well. "Thank you for being there. Stay safe, Jack." He typed back, "You too, Rachel." As the stars began to appear overhead, Jack leaned back in his chair, Ghost's steady breathing, a comforting rhythm beside him. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked, sharp, joyful, alive. And Jack Reeves smiled, knowing that in this small mountain town, justice had been served, loyalty had been honored, and heroes, both human and canine, had proven that courage would always triumph over cruelty. The mission was complete. The warrior was home, and the bond between man and dog remained unbreakable. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs to be reminded that heroes still exist. Don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already, and let us know in the comments, what was your favorite moment? Was it Ghost's loyalty, Jack's protection, or the moment justice was served? We read every comment. God bless, and see you in the next story.